March 19th, 2015. It was an unremarkable morning, but for Sarah, every day was a step toward something greater. At 28 years old, she had just completed her law degree and was now in the final stages of becoming a civil rights lawyer. She was someone who had always believed in the power of justice. Growing up in a middle-class family, Sarah had witnessed the inequalities around her and vowed to become a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Her ultimate dream, though, was bigger. She wanted to one day become a judge. Her mother, Diane, a devout woman herself, had raised Sarah with strong Christian values. Sarah embodied those values not just in her professional pursuits but also in her personal life. She regularly attended Bible study at the local church and was deeply involved in community work. Sarah's faith wasn't just a set of beliefs. It was the moral compass that guided her every action. That morning, Sarah was preparing to attend her regular Bible study class. Diane reminded her that only 2 days remained before Easter weekend. "We have so much to prepare for Easter Sunday, sweetheart. Can you make it back home a little early today?" Sarah smiled. "Sure, Mom, I'll be home right after class. There's a lot to do for the church as well." Easter was the most significant holiday in their household, much like it was for millions of Christians worldwide. The house would be filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread, the sounds of children preparing for the egg hunts, and the light-hearted chatter of relatives visiting from out of town. But on that day, neither Sarah nor her mother could have imagined the darkness that would soon engulf their lives. After Bible study, Sarah stopped by the church to offer a quick prayer before heading home. As she walked out, she noticed Michael Peters, a local street vendor who sold religious items outside the church gates. He had a small table set up with crosses, prayer cards, and small, blessed trinkets that claimed to bring good luck. Sarah had passed by Michael's stall many times before, exchanging polite nods but never engaging much beyond that. Today, however, was different. Little did she know, this man would flip her life upside down. For the next few weeks, Sarah's name was heard in every corner of the world, and her story became sensational news around the world. Social media exploded with #JusticeForSarah, demanding accountability for what had happened. In today's video, we're going to break down the shocking incident that not only shook the nation but the whole world. As I mentioned in the intro, Sarah had just finished praying at the church when she came across Michael, a middle-aged man selling charms and religious trinkets. Michael tried to sell Sarah a charm, but Sarah, being a devout Christian who strictly followed the Bible, knew that using charms and symbols beyond biblical scripture was considered wrong according to her faith. Sarah hesitated for a moment. She wasn't one to buy into superstitions, and the items Michael was selling didn't align with her deeply held beliefs. She knew the Bible well, particularly the commandment that forbade idol worship. For her, faith in God was enough, and the idea of attaching divine significance to physical objects like an amulet seemed not only unnecessary, but also wrong. "No, thank you," she said politely, but firmly. "I don't believe in these kinds of things. It goes against our teachings." Michael's smile faltered, replaced by a look of annoyance. "What do you mean against our teachings? These are blessed by the church. People wear them for protection." "That's not how faith works," Sarah replied calmly. "Our belief is in God, not in objects. These amulets could be misleading people." Her words hit a nerve. Michael's livelihood depended on people buying into the supposed mystical properties of his trinkets. A public disagreement like this could damage his business, especially with other churchgoers watching from a distance. "Are you calling me a fraud?" Michael snapped, his voice rising. "No, I'm just saying that people should rely on God, not these things," Sarah replied, maintaining her composure. The argument drew the attention of others nearby. Sensing that the situation was escalating, Sarah decided it was best to leave before things got out of hand. She turned to walk away, but Michael, realizing the danger her words posed to his business, was not ready to let her go that easily. "Wait!" he shouted, his voice tinged with desperation and anger. Why are you trying to stop people from buying these? What are you hiding? Sarah turned back to face him. I'm not hiding anything. I just don't believe in what you're selling. That's all. Michael's face twisted in fury. He needed to divert attention away from himself and put the blame on Sarah before word spread around the church community. And then, in a moment of panic, he made the most dangerous accusation he could think of. She's mocking the Bible, he screamed, loud enough for everyone to hear. She just said she doesn't believe in the Holy Scriptures. The crowd, which had been passively watching until then, suddenly stirred. For the deeply religious community, such an accusation was incendiary. People began murmuring, exchanging glances of confusion and disbelief. I didn't say that, Sarah exclaimed, horrified. That's not true at all. But it was too late. Michael, sensing the power of the crowd's reaction, pressed further. She burned a Bible. I saw her. She's trying to defile our faith. The accusation was absurd, but it didn't matter. The seed had been planted. A murmur ran through the crowd, quickly turning into angry whispers. She burned a Bible? Someone asked. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. No, that's a lie. But Michael was relentless. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out some torn, burnt papers, pieces of an old Bible he had found earlier that week. Look, he yelled, holding them up for all to see. She did this. A wave of anger washed over the crowd. A few people stepped forward, their faces twisted in disgust and rage. How dare you burn the Word of God? One man shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Sarah. Sarah backed away, trying to explain herself, but the crowd was not interested in hearing the truth. I didn't burn anything. I'm a Christian. Why would I do that? She pleaded, but her words were drowned out by the rising clamor. In that moment, Sarah felt an icy grip of fear. She had heard of mob mentality before, had read about it in law school, but never imagined she would be at the center of such a situation. The people who had been her neighbors, who she had grown up around, now looked at her with hatred in their eyes. The crowd began to close in, their anger swelling with every passing second. Michael, now emboldened by the crowd's response, sneered. She's lying. She's trying to weasel her way out of it. Don't let her get away. The first stone was thrown by a man in the front. It hit Sarah on the shoulder, causing her to stumble. Then another. And another. Panic surged through her as she realized the danger she was in. She tried to run, but the crowd quickly surrounded her, blocking any chance of escape. She's an outsider, someone shouted. She's been pretending to be one of us. What happened next was a blur of violence and chaos. The moment one person acted, it was like everyone was waiting for permission to unleash their fury. A mob of over 100 people surrounded Sarah, and they began attacking her brutally. The mob, now completely overtaken by fury, descended upon Sarah. People grabbed whatever they could find, rocks, sticks, anything that could be used as a weapon. The accusations of burning the Bible had ignited something primal in the crowd, something dark and uncontrollable. They attacked her mercilessly, kicking, punching, and hitting her with stones. Sarah screamed, begging them to stop, but her cries fell on deaf ears. Her once vibrant face was now bloodied and bruised, her body broken under the weight of their relentless blows. Even when she collapsed, the crowd didn't stop. By now, the police had arrived, and they tried to intervene. Some officers tried to pull Sarah to safety, but Sarah, terrified of the men around her, asked for a female officer. While she was saying this, a man from the crowd grabbed her and dragged her onto the road, ripping off her coat and screaming for the crowd to beat her to death. A young boy, no older than 16, picked up a large rock and threw it at her head, knocking her to the ground. Another man, who had been filming the entire event on his phone, laughed as he captured the horrific scene. Sarah's life was slipping away, but the mob didn't stop. They continued to beat her, even as she lay unconscious, her body no longer able to respond to the pain. It wasn't enough to hurt her, they needed to destroy her completely. Hours later, after the mob had finally dispersed, the police recovered Sarah's body. She was unrecognizable. Her face, once full of life and hope, was now a grotesque mask of blood and bruises. Her mother was called to identify the body, but she could barely bring herself to look at what remained of her daughter. This news spread like wildfire, not just through the nation, but across the country. Social media exploded with outrage. Justice for Sarah trended within hours as people demanded accountability for the horrific crime. But amidst the public outcry, there were those who defended the actions of the stepdaughter. Mob. Some politicians tried to justify what had happened, saying, "This is what happens when someone disrespects the Bible." But within 2 days, an investigation revealed that Sarah had done nothing wrong. She had never burned the Bible. This revelation sparked outrage across the country. Protests erupted, demanding justice for Sarah. For the first time in ancient history, Sarah's funeral was entirely conducted by women. As no men were allowed to touch her body under immense public pressure, the government arrested over 50 people based on video footage of the incident. Charges were brought against 49 individuals, including 19 police officers who had failed to intervene. However, many were released due to insufficient evidence. Of the remaining individuals, 8 received 16-year prison sentences, and 4 were initially sentenced to death. But even those sentences were later reduced to 20 years, and the boy who threw the rock received just 10 years because he was a minor. The trial of Sarah Michaels's murder became a national spectacle. Reporters from across the country flocked to cover the proceedings. Michael Peters, the street vendor who had falsely accused Sarah, was arrested along with several others involved in the attack. As the case moved forward, the country was divided. Some saw the incident as a tragic failure of justice, while others continued to argue that Sarah had brought it upon herself by supposedly disrespecting their faith. Michael was charged with inciting violence and second-degree murder. Several other key members of the mob were also charged with manslaughter and assault. But even with the overwhelming evidence against them, including video footage from bystanders, the trial didn't go as many had hoped. The defense attorneys representing Michael and the other defendants painted a narrative that Sarah had, in fact, disrespected the community's beliefs. They emphasized the anger and emotional distress caused by Sarah's perceived blasphemy, despite it being based on a lie. The defense argued that the mob had been incited not by Michael's actions, but by Sarah's own words, twisting the story to suggest that the crowd had acted in a misguided but understandable act of religious defense. To the shock of many, several defendants were acquitted of the most severe charges, with Michael Peters only receiving a reduced sentence for his role in the incitement of the violence. The argument of religious provocation was enough to sway some of the jurors, particularly those from conservative backgrounds who sympathized with the idea of defending their faith, no matter how extreme the actions were. For Sarah's family, the verdict felt like another brutal attack, a second cruel betrayal. Diane, who had lost her only daughter, was left devastated. She had hoped that the trial would bring justice, that the people who had taken Sarah's life would face the consequences of their actions. But instead, she saw them walk free or receive minimal punishment. The public outcry was fierce. Protests erupted across the country, with thousands marching in solidarity with the Michaels family, demanding justice for Sarah. Social media platforms became battlegrounds for discussions on religious extremism, mob violence, and the role of justice in America. Celebrities, activists, and politicians voiced their support, but the legal system had already delivered its verdict. Amidst the uproar, one voice remained notably silent: the church. The very place that Sarah had gone to for spiritual solace and community was now avoiding responsibility for what had transpired. Despite the fact that many members of the mob had been regular churchgoers, the leadership of the church refused to make any formal statement condemning the actions of their congregation. For Sarah's mother, this silence was unbearable. She had always believed that the church stood for justice, forgiveness, and compassion. But in the wake of her daughter's murder, the church seemed more concerned with protecting its image than standing up for what was right. Diane sought meetings with the local clergy, asking them to speak out against the violence, but they remained evasive. Finally, After months of public pressure, the head pastor of the church released a brief statement during a Sunday service. "We are saddened by the events that transpired, and we pray for everyone involved, especially the Michaels family," he said before quickly moving on to the next topic. There was no mention of the mob, no condemnation of the violence, and no call for justice. It was a gut punch to Diane and the rest of Sarah's family. They had hoped that the church, which had been such a central part of their lives, would at least offer some semblance of support or atonement. But instead, they felt abandoned. In the months following the trial, Diane channeled her grief into action. She refused to let Sarah's story fade into the background, even as the media moved on to the next big story. Diane established the Sarah Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness about mob violence, wrongful accusations, and religious extremism. The foundation also worked to provide legal aid to victims of similar crimes and their families. Diane's advocacy gained traction, and soon she was speaking at events across the country. She gave interviews on national television, met with lawmakers, and became a fierce advocate for justice reform. She wasn't just fighting for Sarah anymore. She was fighting for all victims of mob violence, for those who had been silenced or ignored. Through her tireless efforts, Diane helped push for legislation that made it easier to prosecute those involved in mob violence, regardless of their perceived justification. The bill, dubbed Sarah's Law, aimed to hold individuals accountable for participating in or inciting violence, even if the violence was sparked by false accusations or religious motivations. The law faced fierce opposition from conservative and religious groups, who argued that it infringed on their right to defend their beliefs. But Diane persisted, working with lawmakers and activists to build bipartisan support for the bill. After years of advocacy, Sarah's Law was finally passed, providing a glimmer of hope for families like hers. Years after the tragedy, became known not just for the horrific crime that had taken place, but for the justice that had followed. The community had been deeply scarred, but it had also been given the chance to heal. And in that healing, there was a lesson about the power of truth, the danger of false accusations, and the enduring strength of a mother's love. In a quiet corner of the city, a statue was erected in Sarah's honor. The inscription read, "In memory of Sarah, a fighter for justice. May we never forget the power of truth and the importance of standing up for what is right." And so Sarah's legacy lived on, forever a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of justice can shine through. In my opinion, Sarah did not receive justice. Punishments handed down were not nearly severe enough. The people who killed her weren't defending their faith. They were acting on their own hatred and anger. They found an innocent woman to take out their frustrations on, and for that, they should have faced much harsher consequences. Now let's talk about mob mentality. When a group of people gathers, they can sometimes lose their individual sense of right and wrong. They get caught up in the actions of others, believing they can act without consequences simply because they're part of a crowd. This is exactly what happened to Sarah. If you ever find yourself in a situation like this, always think before you act. Don't blindly follow the crowd. Investigate the truth and only then make a decision. Otherwise, innocent people like Sarah pay the price for someone else's lies. So what do you think about this? Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone was wrongly punished? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and your best comment may be featured in the next video.